then what the UN SDGs are, what kind of implementation looks like, how are they implemented, what is the reality of the UN SDGs, particularly in business, how are they performing, how can we make them perform better, and then a Q&A. So I think perhaps that I will speak for 20, 25 minutes, and then we can have a Q&A. There is not too many of you on the call, so please feel free to ask questions as we go. It's no problem. And yes, I hope you find this interesting. So I'm going to start with how the UN SDGs started. Where do they come from? And I'm just going to show one slide, and it's a timeline. So I'm going to talk you through the slide slowly. So the journey starts in 1945. The end of the Second World War marked a period of economic growth and reconstruction, particularly in Western Europe and in North America. And of course, in 1945, the United Nations was established to promote international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. Okay, that was the idea at the time. But the United Nations was founded. Of course, that's important because we are here to talk about the UN SDGs. So there was a major economic boom between 1945 and the late 1970s, particularly in the global north and the Western world. However, in 1972, a group of economists and forward thinkers, sustainable thinkers, put together a report, and it was called the Limits to Growth Report. They called themselves the Club of Rome. Now, they didn't come from Rome or they didn't come from Italy, but they called themselves the Club of Rome, and they published this report, and it was called Limits to Growth. And it was a seminal report that for the first time used computer models to project future global trends, and it warned about the potential consequences of the unrestrained economic growth that was happening in the Western world and the impact that would have on sustainability and the planet's resources. This was a major report at the time. It's not talked about too much anymore, but in 1972, this was the front page of newspapers and was news headlines. So it was really big at the time, and I wouldn't say it's completely forgotten now. There's a lot of ecological economists and people trying to bring it back, but it was major at the time in 1972. And what happened to it was that the economists at the time did not like it. They did not like the idea that there was limits to economic growth in the Western world and the global north, and they attacked it. And so this moment where sustainability was put on the front page of the newspapers quickly disappeared. But nonetheless, Limits to Growth has had a very large impact on sustainability and sustainability for countries and in business that absolutely influenced the UN SDGs. We have to wait another 16 years almost for the next major event, and it was the Brundtland Commission report, not a very easy to remember name, but it was a report called Our Common Future, and it brought back again this idea that sustainable development was important, and it introduced the term sustainable development to balance economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. So sustainability and sustainable development back on the table in 1987. And countries started to again think about what it meant to develop sustainably and not just use all the resources as quickly as possible, no matter what the consequences. However, that didn't last very long. In 1989, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall. And for the 1990s, we really had a lot of unconstrained capitalist development and economic growth. Once again, sustainability was off the agenda until the late 90s, where climate change and destruction of nature we started to feel the consequences of that directly. Particularly, of course, it had been felt a long time in the global south over many centuries, but the global north started to feel the consequences. And therefore, in the year 2000, we got the precursor, the pre-development of the UN SDGs, and these were called the Millennium Development Goals. This was the establishment of 8 international goals And the idea is that they'd be achieved by 2015, reducing hunger, reducing poverty, reducing disease, more education, reducing environmental discrimination, and reducing discrimination against women. So the Millennium Development Goals achieved some success, but they were not fully achieved. And so in 2015, the year that they ended, world leaders got back together at the United Nations and said, the Millennium Development Goals were not achieved. What do we do next? And at the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, they established the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the aim, as the name suggests, was that they would be achieved by 2030. And remarkably, all nations signed up to the UN SDGs. Okay, so that is a little bit about the timeline of the UN SDGs and how they came about, that I hope you found interesting. So, what are the UN SDGs? Well, the UN SDGs are a collection of 17 global goals set by the United Nations in 2015. They are designed as a blueprint to achieve a better, more sustainable future for all by 2030. That is the words of the United Nations. All the goals are interconnected and aim to address global challenges, including, of course, poverty, inequality, climate change, peace and justice, and to develop partnerships to do so. The idea from the United Nations is that by working globally towards these goals, we can create a more sustainable and equitable world. And as you can see, there's 17 of them. So I won't go through them all one by one. However, each goal has underneath it more targets, progress indicators, and measures for success. So each goal, while it appears the 17, they can be very clear and feel very top line, there's actually a lot that's going on underneath of them. So just to call out a few of them, obviously, the most famous is SDG 1, no poverty. And that is, in its more fuller form, end poverty in all its forms everywhere by 2030. This means ensuring that everyone has enough money to make basic needs such as food, shelter, and clothing. Everyone in the world. SDG 2, zero hunger. End hunger everywhere in the world by 2030. Achieve food security, improve nutrition. So all people everywhere access to not just food, but nutritious food all year round. I'll call out another one, quality education. This is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for everyone in the world. This goal focuses on giving access to education from primary all the way through to higher education and adult training. So I've just called out 3 there, and you see the ambition that was set in 2015. These targets are for everybody in the world. They're to ensure everyone has access to food, no one is hungry, everyone has good education, and I've only called out 3 of them. I will call out another one, for example, sustainable cities and communities. So make all cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. This involves ensuring access to safe and affordable housing, transportation, and green spaces. So we see that these sustainability goals are ambitious, and they are for everyone on Earth, okay? If anyone has any particular SDGs that they would like me to go into more detail on, please feel free to call it out or put it in the chat. But because there are so many, I'm just going to give a couple examples as we go through this presentation. But hopefully you get the idea that these are ambitious targets and they apply to everybody. Now, in my class, what I would usually do is that I would ask my students, I know there's a few academics on the call, so you can take this as an example if you want to teach the UN SDGs, or perhaps you already do. This is just an exercise I do with my class to make them think about the UN SDGs and which are most important to them. So I would ask my students to familiarize themselves with all 17 and to write down their top 3 UN SDGs with an explanation of why they chose those goals and to share them with the class. So that is an exercise I'll leave for each of you to do if you're interested, is to think about which are the most important to you or your organization. And this is important because most organizations and countries don't try and tackle all of the UN SDGs at once. They try and tackle 3 or 4. Tackling all 17 for many organizations is too many. They don't have the resource, and so they are not successful. So a lot of organizations will try and work out which is the most important 3 or 4 to them and focus on those. In Ireland, there was a public consultation, and they identified the top 5 SDGs by importance to the Irish public. And I have put the top 3 here for Ireland, the Irish public. Climate action, good health and well-being, and no poverty were the 3 that the Irish public found most important. And there's a lot of detail, as I say, underneath the UN SDG, and you can sometimes get lost and feel overwhelmed. But just for these 3 or so, I want to share with you the detail that goes underneath each UN SDG, okay? And I'm going to give some Irish examples as it's the context I understand. So, UN SDG 13, climate action. The goal of UN SDG 13 is to limit human-caused climate change, and it has multiple targets, all to be achieved by 2030. I put them in a table. It's going to be on the next slide. I don't want you to go and learn off the table, but I just want to show you an example of what the targets are underneath each UN SDG. So for UN SDG 13 climate action, the targets are: number 1, to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries, integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning, improve education around climate change, and implement the commitment undertaken by developed countries' parties to mobilize jointly $100 billion annually by 2020. And in fact, that target 13A is a highly political target that has failed. And it is still the subject today, ongoing, of efforts to mobilize finance and money for countries in the global south to be able to adapt and mitigate to climate change. Because of course, the majority of climate change is caused by countries in the global north, and the majority of the negative impacts, climate disasters, loss of life, is felt by the global south. So underneath the UN SDGs and the Paris Agreement, global north countries were supposed to mobilize jointly $100 million annually by 2020, and they failed to do so. But the point is, for this, is that you see each UN SDG has targets that must be met. And not a lot of people realize that. They often see the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and think that they're just a couple of words and a bright selection of colors. Well, actually, there are targets underneath, and all of those targets are monitored regularly at national and international levels. So just for example, looking at UN SDG 13, how are the latest progress indicators looking? So under targeting 13.1, it's about reducing deaths from climate related impacts. We see that disaster related impacts have nearly halved. However, the absolute number remains very high. Looking at target 13.2, and this is about keeping global warming to within the Paris Agreement, we see that every single climate indicator has been broken. And it goes on and so forth. And of course, we failed to get to the $100 billion as necessary. So we'll come on to this a little bit later, but the UN SDGs are struggling. They're struggling a lot. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. At an Irish level, I'm pleased to say, thankfully in Ireland, that we have given our fair share of money into the $100 billion pot, meeting our climate finance targets. But many countries, this is not happening, of course. Good health and well-being. So what is good health and well-being as a UN SDG? What are the targets around that? And it's focused on reducing global mortality, especially amongst mothers, ending epidemics, ending preventable deaths of newborns, strengthening and preventing treatment of substance abuse, even down to road traffic accidents. Very interesting, target 3.7, universal access to healthcare services and for family planning, and achieving universal health coverage, including financial risk protection, that you don't become bankrupt because you're trying to get access to healthcare. And by 2030, substantially reducing the number of deaths and illnesses from pollution in the air. So some very ambitious targets, once again, on good health and well-being. In fact, that Ireland is very much struggling with at times. And then finally, just a brief look at no poverty, the targets and the indicators. So targeting, top line, no poverty anywhere in the world, men, women, or children. And as you can see here, I won't go through them one by one, but just to give you a sense of the targets that are underneath UN SDG. And again, there are progress reports, and it's monitored how we are doing against these targets. Okay. And in Ireland, we have problems with poverty, even though we're one of the richest nations in the world. 1 in 5 children in Ireland live in households that are unable to buy them shoes. And that is extraordinary. As I say, we are one of the richest countries in the world, but yet 20% of our children live in social deprivation. That is because we have a great wealth imbalance. We have some people in Ireland who are very, very rich and have access to lots of resources, but we also have 20% that are very, very poor. And what is happening is that we're not sharing. The resources are not being shared. And a lot of people are getting left behind, particularly after the 2008 financial crash. Okay, so I want to share with you some examples of implementation. What does this look like in reality? Well, the country section, at the country level, again, using Ireland as an example, we have a national implementation plan. The government of Ireland has put together a plan to implement the UN SDGs. It is in collaboration with all government departments, stakeholders, business, education, anyone you can think of who's invested in Ireland, and input from 2 public consultation processes. So the government went out to the people of Ireland on two separate occasions and consulted them and said, what do you want to see from the implementation of the UN SDGs? So that is to say, it's pretty big and it's pretty important in Ireland. The plan sets out 5 strategic objectives for Ireland and 51 actions to implement them. So again, you see there's a lot of resource, a lot of time and planning going into the UN SDGs in Ireland. And also the plan contains 22 case studies to share examples of the initiatives and examples of best practice projects. This is in universities, in schools, in cultural groups as well. So this is to give you an idea that if states want to do the UN SDGs well, or as well as they can, it takes a lot of resource. There's a lot of teams that are and actions that go into it. And Ireland is an example that really kind of takes the UN SDGs seriously, even if we fail to achieve them as well as we should. What about businesses and organizations? How do they implement the UN SDGs? So I'm sharing an example here of actually the Irish Post Office. Okay, it's called An Post. And An Post is actually one of the most progressive and sustainable organizations in Ireland, and they win a lot of international awards. So they might just be the Irish Post Office, but they're actually very good at an international level. And they're very much trendsetters and leaders in Ireland for sustainability. And so just to give you a few examples of how they as an organization implement the UN SDGs, what they do is in their strategy, they put the UN SDGs at the heart of their strategy every year. And they choose 5 UN SDGs to focus on. As I say, choosing them all 17 would kind of be too many. So what they do is they do a materiality assessment and they say, these are the 5 we're going to focus our resources on, we're going to monitor against and report on. And so you see they have chosen economic growth, they have chosen sustainable cities, they have chosen responsible consumption, they have chosen climate action, and they have chosen sustainable industry as well. And they set out their strategy to achieve these UN SDGs and their resource. So the important thing for Unpost as an organization is right from how they develop their operations, they're embedding the UN SDGs, and that's what makes it so effective. Rather than tag the UN SDGs on as something at the end, as a maybe we'll hit them, maybe we won't, they put them at the heart of their strategy and also at the heart of their reporting, and that makes a big difference. So I'm going to share with you next an example of their sustainability reporting as an organization, and this is just a grab from their latest sustainability report, but you'll see that they report their sustainability against the UN SDGs. And there's pages and pages, but I've just shared one grab from, if you look at the far left, you'll see SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. For this SDG, they have a number of objectives, like no 0 hours contracts. That means like no unfair contracts. Amount of, even down to road traffic accidents their employees have, the proportion of women in senior management positions, etc. So they have a number of objectives under this SDG, a number of KPIs to monitor success, and they show their performance over since 2018 to 2023. So you really get a sense of how this UN SDG is being implemented successfully and how they're progressing over time. And this is a very good example of how to report on the UN SDGs. And they don't just do it for this one, but they do it for all 5, the ones I showed before. And so this really is best in class sustainability implementation of the UN SDGs. So you really get a sense that Unpost know what they're doing and that they're very transparent and they're reporting openly, and you can see the progress. And sometimes it doesn't work and they'll say our performance is up or down, and that transparency is very, very important. And this data is open to everybody. Another way that organizations implement the UN SDGs is that they use them as well to determine what is important to their business and then report on that as well. So here's an example. Glanbia are a major Irish company, major international company. Their income is in the billions of dollars every year. They're a major agricultural company, okay? So they're a $1 billion company, and they use the UN SDGs as the basis for their materiality assessment to see what is most important to them for sustainability. So there's a quote from their annual report in 2022. While all 17 SDGs are critical as part of their sustainability strategy, they've identified 6 which they have the strongest impact through our business and actions. So you see, again, same as Unpost, Glanbia have assessed which UN SDGs are most important, and they act on those 6 through their business actions and against their wider sustainability strategy of climate and environment, people and society, and governance, okay? So you see, that's just an example of how they're being used at a business level. And then again, Glanbia will go on and report against those 6 SDGs. So again, an exercise for my students that I would give them, and you might want to reflect on this for your organizations, if you're a student or if you're a member of the academic staff for organizations you work with, or for the university itself, of course. What I would give my class to do is ask them which UN SDGs are most important, most material to their organizations. And it's a really nice exercise to get them to think, to prioritize, and discuss with each other. And so that is an exercise you can take away and maybe think about for your own students, because I find it very, very effective. Okay. So how are the SDGs performing? All right, this is where it gets a little bit more challenging. So we've got a deadline of 2030 for achieving the UN SDGs. And as I remind you, these are very ambitious. No poverty, no hunger, everyone with healthcare, everyone housed. Okay, I think we know that this isn't going exactly to plan, right? So according to the United Nations themselves, the UN SDGs are off track. And according to the United Nations, this lag stems from the slowing of the global economy by shocks, including COVID-19, international conflicts, of course, we're very aware of, which they say weren't anticipated in 2015 when the goals were agreed. Well, okay. So one might say to the United Nations, you might have thought ahead and think about how to achieve these, even with international conflicts and pandemics, but this is their answer, okay? They didn't see this coming. So in the words of the United Nations, the goals require deep transformations and urgent transformations in education, health, energy, and land use in an integrated manner, and governments need to fund them as quickly as possible, okay? Most countries are way off track. Again, this is the words of the United Nations. Only a few targets, just 15%, have been met. And those targets include the targets around things like mobile broadband and internet usage. So not really the big ticket items like zero hunger and justice and peace, of course, okay? So these are not progressing like we want them to. If we look down against each of the 17 UN SDGs, we see the United Nations' own assessment. And of course, this is a real reality check. It's a concerning picture. There's 140 targets that can be evaluated right now against the 17 SDGs. Half of them show moderate or severe deviations from the targets. More than 30% have experienced no progress, or even worse, are actually worse than where they were in 2015. So again, this underscores the urgent need for intensified efforts for the UN SDGs to stay on course, okay? Okay, so on to just a little bit around the commentary. Again, this is United Nations commentary about what's happened. So the slowing of the global economy from COVID-19 and international conflicts. And of course, we need deep transformations. Now, of course, my own commentary on this would be that we have more than enough resources to achieve the UN SDGs as it is. We don't need, as the UN says, more economic growth. We just need fairer sharing of current resources, okay? As if you tuned into my last lecture, you might remember that we have an incredible amount of resource extraction going on. It's just going to the wrong people. It's going to the people who already have the resources and not the people who need it most. But this is the UN's kind of diagnosis, and they are clear that governments need to now look at long-term infrastructure investments to solve this problem, okay? And of course, the global 19 recovery has not helped. This is my kind of own, commentary. So the UN SDG actions, they remain siloed. There's a lack of systemic and interconnected thinking from governments and from international organizations, okay? And the COVID-19 recovery plans that were put in place increased spending on health, yes, but they also supported, especially in places like the global north, carbon-intensive industries instead of boosting renewables. So the recovery from COVID-19 could have been one based on developing the UN SDGs and transforming our societies to be more sustainable, but instead governments paid a lot of money, printed a lot of money and put it into oil, gas, and highly polluting industries. And also, this lack of systemic systems thinking is really apparent because few countries' climate commitments under the Paris Agreement contain the SDG outcomes. They don't include the SDGs, impacts on incomes, poverty, jobs, inequality, health, education. So governments, like my government would be one of these, who really fails to link climate action with wider systemic benefits. The fact that if you achieve the Paris agreements, you also make good impacts on education, good impacts on health, and good impacts on inequality. And we need to start, our governments need to start doing that systemic thinking as well. Okay, so solutions. So in September, there was a major international conference taking place where solutions to help fix or help the UN SDGs is happening, okay? So what needs to happen at this major international UN conferences in September if we're going to get the UN SDGs back on track, okay? So 5 kind of suggestions that I would give to them. One is that we need an updated SDG framework, a new SDG framework to guide efforts, not to 2030, but all the way to 2050, needs to be put in place. Every nation needs to develop and submit revised, comprehensive reviews of their SDG strategies, setting clear targets for 2030, 2040, and 2050, okay? It's clear we're not going to achieve the UN SDGs by 2030. It should be pushed, it should keep going, we shouldn't give up, but we do need clearer targets, and we do need to make them for 2030, 2040, and 2050, okay? This needs to include clear transformation pathways. So we need plans from countries, okay? No more just saying, yeah, sure, I'm going to do it. We need actual plans with targets, okay? So number 2, global governance for planetary health. We need global governance mechanisms. It's not just enough for countries anymore to, as we know, do whatever they want. They fail to meet their targets and nothing happens to them, okay? We need better global governance that's focused on good planetary health for nature and all of its people, and to ensure that policies are implemented globally and fairly, okay? We do not have that, but we need that. Number 3, enhanced financing and debt relief. So we need to implement an SDG stimulus program to give money to countries, particularly in the global south, that need investment in health, in education. Of course, we know that countries that were decolonialized were left with a legacy of huge debt to global north countries that has been institutionalized by the World Bank, the IMF, and others. So instead of being able to make investments in the UN SDGs, in health, in poverty, they're instead paying debts, unsustainable debts, to former colonial countries. This debt needs to be completely eliminated. And what needs to happen is those companies and organizations that are making the situation worse, fossil fuel companies, big emitters for products and services that are not required, need to be taxed heavily. Okay, so we need to really turn this on its head. The people that need the money need debt relief. The countries that need the money need debt relief. And the people doing the damage need to be taxed heavily and out of existence. Okay, so for example, introduction of a global carbon tax that will fund renewable products, and debt relief for low-income countries to free up the resources they need. Okay, so end of that colonial era taxes and debt spirals needs to happen. Okay, number 4, policy and regional cooperation. We need countries to be able to cooperate, work together in financial frameworks, in fair banking systems, like the African Union, to coordinate to build green energy grids. Asian countries to be able to do the same, to have shared marine resources and tackle problems together. And then finally, 5, knowledge-based approach. We need publicly funded research systems so everyone can benefit from the latest research, okay? And latest scientific approaches. We saw just during COVID, where again, the global north held on to vaccines. They held on to the technology and the IP of vaccines and wouldn't give it to global south countries. That needs to change. We need research that is shared. We need technology that is shared and just given, because it benefits everyone around agriculture, around green energy, around healthcare. We need to stop selling this to the highest bidder and to give it away. And that is how these 5 steps we can save the UN SDGs. Bottom line, it's a lot more cooperation. It's a lot more sharing, especially from global north to global south, and it means debt relief as well. Okay, that's my 2 cents on that's my 2 cents anyway. Okay, so yeah, what should happen next? UN needs to establish an updated SDG framework that's easy to use with simpler and clearer targets and timelines. Every country needs a national review on where it stands and how it's going to get there and achieve them. Global governance structure needs to be behind this. We need money. We need money to be given to people that need it, countries that need it, to build schools, to build hospitals, to give people the food they need. And we need policy and financial coherence, okay? That's what we need to do at this big September meeting. That's what I think, at least. Okay, that was it. I hope that was interesting. A little take on the UN SDGs, where we're at, how they're performing, and what needs to happen. But bottom line, the UN SDGs are very valuable. I think their biggest positive is bringing people together and forming partnerships and allowing people to use a similar framework to solve problems, whether it be university, whether it be at government level, in business. It allows us to speak a common language. But the problem we have at the moment really is that not enough resource, not enough implementation is happening. And we have this huge structural imbalance in the world, as I say, of course, where the resources are going to the wrong people. And as long as that is happening, we're not going to achieve the UN SDGs. And it's going to take a major change to do that. And I think that needs to happen, of course, at every level for climate, for global equality, and the UN SDGs are a part of that. And there we go. I hope that was interesting. And I'd love any questions, thoughts, or comments you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Dr. Rafat. Thank you, Dr. Diran, for this nice, fruitful presentation and workshop. Indeed, it is fruitful and have a great knowledge. Also, I'd like to thank my colleague, Dr. Rafat, to give us this important opportunity. Really, I'd like to add a point, which is under the umbrella of a few restrictions in the current time will save the planet resources and make a good chance for the next generation. So we should achieve this goal, in my opinion, by two things. The first point is how to think green. I think this needs to spread culture in all societies, to train people to think green. This will save the planet resources. For example, save water when used for personals, when used at home, at different life sectors, washing cars, will help in saving the planet resources. As well as, for example, let me give a simple example. When you need to buy a pen, the seller put the pen in the plastic bag. I think you can put it directly in your personal pocket. When you need to buy something from supermarket, we see that the seller places each item in one plastic bag, but really we can put all of them on one plastic bag. And the examples are much about these points. So in my opinion, we should help and train people in all societies to think green. This will save the planet resources and will help to achieve the SDGs goal regarding this point. The second point is the using AI, because now we are living in the AI revolution. So we can use AI to achieve SDGs. For example, using AI in irrigation, smart agriculture will save water from waste. Many farmers consume more water without actually need. So AI, in my opinion, will be a key solution in saving the assets of our life and our planet. The third point I need, if we can examine the waste of the resources, water and energy, we will find significant amount of waste without actually need. So in my opinion, we should train people, we should train society to think green in order to save the energy and water and other planet resources and to achieve the better future for the next generation. Thank you very much, Dr. Ciar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would greatly appreciate your comments and thoughts. And of course, I agree with you. Some observations from Ireland. In Ireland, we have, around where I live, we have the internet. I mean, we physically have the internet. It's extraordinary. If you drive round Dublin, on the side of the big road that goes around Dublin, there are huge grey buildings. They're massive. They have no windows. And that is where they're called data centers. And that is where the internet is. And it's where the AI processes are. And we have a big problem because they use incredible amounts of water and energy. And in fact, they are going to, by 2030, use almost 40% of all of Ireland's electricity. This huge growth of this internet and AI infrastructure. So I think something that is really important is that what do we use AI for? Is it, as you say, we need to use AI to help solve our real problems. That is so important, like water, like irrigation. We need to use the power of AI to help us be more sustainable. Absolutely. One of the problems we have now is that AI and this infrastructure that uses so much water and so much energy where I live is being used for marketing, is being used to push products and advertisements onto people to get them to buy more and more things from Amazon and for whatever, for clothes and everything. And there's very little awareness of this and very little being done, especially not by our government. So it's just an interesting point, I think, that AI could be a great resource, but we must use it for solving real problems and not what is being used for at the moment, which is how do I get people to buy more stuff? But thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ciar. Thank you.
Okay, we have here a comment in the chat.
Can I make some notes?
A comment in the chat, absolutely. Thank you a lot for this interesting. Thank you, Sandy. Thanks a lot for this interesting. But the UN SDG goals
Dr. Carol
is really pessimistic. Oh yes, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Carol, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yes. Hello, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizer of this esteemed webinar. Of course, I'm Abdul Malik Tawil. I work as a financial analyst at the Palestine Monetary Authority. I'm also pursuing a master's degree in accounting at An-Najah University. And of course, in the final stage of completing my thesis. I consider myself fortunate that this webinar aligns with the period of preparation of my master's thesis, which is titled Board Diversity and Sustainability Development Goals Disclosure. Based on my previous knowledge and experience, particularly during my visit to Dublin City last year as a part of technical assistance in partnership with the Central Bank of Ireland, I am sure that this webinar was effective and important in the context of keeping pace with modernity, developments, international trends, and even in best practice with regard on sustainability development goals and its 17 goals. My notes at the beginning of the webinar, you asked a question in the form of an exercise, yes? About what are the 3 most important goals regarding sustainable development goals for us. In my opinion, I think under the current circumstances and geopolitical events, it's better to focus on the optimal goals and in a way that meets the urgent need for some people through goals number 2, 3, and 16. It's important to reach zero hunger, good health, and well-being and peace, justic and strong institution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for doing the exercise. I really appreciate that. And I'm glad to hear that you visited Dublin. I hope next time you come, we will have to meet each other. So
I hope that.
God willing, you'll be able to visit soon. And when you do, we will have coffee.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will do it. Thank you.
Any more questions?
On the comment in the chat
Okay.
from Sandy, I will just say the UN SDG goals report is very pessimistic. Yes, Sandy, that is true. It is pessimistic. If I could say something positive, is that I think we have the solutions. You know, the solutions to it are well known. We don't lack any, at global level, any resource. We don't need any technology we don't yet have. What we do need is a will, and that is the will of fairness and equitability that does not exist, as we all, of course, know on this call. We have, especially climate, absolutely, but even in Ireland, I'll use my own country as an example. Even in Ireland, one of the UN SDGs on health, for example, you know, and they call for universal basic benefits, that everyone should have enough money to purchase nutritious food, okay? And we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, as I say. And even in Ireland, there's children who do not have nutritious food. And we have done studies in Ireland. I mean, these studies are simple, right? Where you give the parents the money to buy their kids nutritious food. And of course they do. And the kids are healthier and happier. And then after the study, the government decides, well, that's the end of the study. We're not doing that anymore. And we have the solutions, but there's just the political will, particularly, I think, in the global north, that you have to look after everyone, and that everyone is entitled as a human right to not be hungry, to have housing, to have healthcare. But yes, everyone has to pay for it. And we have a real, I think, with greed problem, as we all know, I'm sure on this call, with the global economy and people taking far much more than they require, even in my country. So I think, Sandy, yes, pessimistic, but all the solutions are available. We just need to make the people with the resources share the resources. And yes, all the SDGs are absolutely related to each other, interconnected. I agree. And that is something that people do not see and really struggle with. Even smart people at governments do not see how climate action is related to good health or to nutritious food. And that is a problem because they need an education on it. So thank you.
Dr. Mohammed, do you have any more question? Okay. If we have more question from our guest, please.
Sorry for unmute, sorry.
Yeah,
Dr. Rafat, regarding to the last point about the climate change, I'd like to add a point to our colleague, Dr. Diran, that while teaching our master students in machine learning, we have built a machine learning model to examine which the feature that has the greatest impact to the climate change. And the machine learning gives us that a green area has the highest impact on climate change from the different features such as population, industry, traffic, number of inhabitants, CO2 emission, but the result was about the green area resources in each country that has the greatest impact to the climate change. Just this. Thank you, Dr. Rafat. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you.
Ciar, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think that we have learned from our mistake? You mentioned that in 2000 we have goals that last for 15 years, and then we have another goal that from 2015 to 2000 to 2030. Do you think that we have such a learning curve?
It's a very good question, and I think the answer, Rafat, is there are people who absolutely have learned, and they're very good people who have the solutions and have done a lot of work on the solutions and what needs to happen. And we'll be going to the meeting in September saying, here, like the 5 solutions I gave, here's what we need to do to achieve all the UN SDGs. I think there are, so to answer your question, there's 2 answers to your question. Yes, people have learned, some very smart people have learned and are proposing solutions. The question is whether the leaders accept the solutions. I think we have a question whether some global leaders really want to solve the UN SDGs, really want to achieve them. Because if they do, the solutions are there, worked out in great detail by very smart and kind people. The question is whether our global leaders will implement them, I think.
Okay, excellent. Another question related to the targets of the SDGs. From your presentation, I see that the targets are global targets, yes, right? While the implementation is, let's say, it is national implementation. So it's kind of, there's internal inconsistency in the current framework. Don't you think?
Yes. So if I heard your question correctly, for example, in Ireland, we take the UN SDGs, and as I say, we have an implementation plan where we make the actions Ireland specific, where we create actions for Ireland. And in fact, our central statistic office measures how we do against our targets and reports publicly. So anyone in Ireland can see how Ireland is performing against our UN SDGs that we've set. So it's very transparent. We do well in some areas, we fail in others. But yes, there is a lot of reporting at country level, and you can make the goals, the UN SDG goals, specific to your country or to your business, your organization, or your institution. As you see with the examples, say with An-Post or Glanbia, they have created targets and objectives linked to the UN SDGs for themselves. And so anyone can take the UN SDGs and use them to make things more sustainable.
Okay, excellent. Concerning research agenda, what kind of research agenda can we have right now, especially in Palestine?
Yeah. Say again, Rafat, sorry.
What kind of research agenda can we have right now concerning the SDG goals in Palestine?
Mm-hmm. If I heard your question, sorry, one more time, what kind of?
Research agenda. Agenda.
Agenda, yes. Well, I think, for example, in Palestine, your situation is, you know, as we know, so difficult. Institutions like universities can really lead the way on the UN SDGs, where you have the lack of centralized organization and where it's so challenging. I think long-term institutions like universities really are the people, the organizations to lead on the UN SDGs, because they impact business, you impact education, you impact all of the UN SDGs, partnerships, all of them. So where the state fails because of lack of capacity or lack of ability, I think universities such as yourselves are the people to lead on the UN SDGs and to set the agenda on them for Palestine.
Okay, thank you. Here we have a comment from Sandy. She says, we can work on the company level, but not only on the country level. Yeah. Not only on the country level, yeah. Okay, yeah. Ciar, if you want to have a comment.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. The more you want to work it on country level, and that feeds down to organizational and company level and institutional level. So that is great. Banking sector already started, sustainable banking department. That's great, Sandy. Sandy, in your sustainable banking department, do you use the UN SDGs at the moment? Do you come across them? Maybe you can say in the chat. Great, that's terrific. And so you might consider, like like the An Post example. By the way, An Post in Ireland, I know I said it's the post office, but also it's also a bank. It's a little bit confusing, but they're also a bank. So you might have a look at their strategy and their reporting and see how they are using the UN SDGs, and it might be helpful or interesting to you. There might be things you can use, because they win international awards for how they use the UN SDGs. So it might be something you find interesting or helpful. Yes, the GRI standard, yes, for sustainability reporting, yes. That would be, that's good as well.
Okay, we have maybe Dr. Maher. Yes, go ahead, Dr. Maher.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Maher Arafat. I want to be frankful and honest with you guys. You know, I once heard about the UN SDG when I was passing through a corridor at our university, An-Najah, in the new campus, and I stood by and I took a picture. And it was the first time an encounter for me with the SDGs, and that was it. I never even read about the SDGs. And last week I received your email, and I said to myself, oh, this must be good. I need to be present in this webinar and this Zoom. This is very interesting. I'm going to be learning a lot about it. But before I leave, because I need to go into the city hall, we have a meeting, urgent meeting. People learn from their mistakes. I mean, wise people learn from their mistakes. So how to become wise? We learn from our mistakes, from other people's mistakes. That's when they say, we don't need to reinvent the wheel to learn. You know, we can pick from where the others, from the others' experiences. In front of me, I start reading about the SDGs. Number 17 is partnership for the goals, and that's most interesting. And this is the most important goal, to build partnership. What came to my mind, because during my teaching with my students, I always go to, I follow the strategy of community-based learning. I need to have them to do a community project to put it into to put words into action, that, as they say. So, and I'm going to be asking my students to consider the SDGs and to consider them in their in the course and the goals. I mean, in the projects of their work during their courses. And maybe the new generation will learn more about it. That's my first goal. I want them to be exposed to know more about the SDG, the UN SDG, and maybe with them young people, as the Americans say, they can come up with new things that we don't even imagine. And this is their future. Considering my age, I can say that it's their future, and they should be responsible for it. So I'm gonna say it again. I'm gonna be working with my students on those SDGs.
Great.
Thank you very much, guys. I learned. Excuse my ignorance. I don't know anything about the UN SDGs before.
Oh, that's good. I hope that's why the lecture. So I'm delighted that it was informative and helpful. And yes, partnerships is.
But I didn't have my camera on.
That's good to see you.
I always sit in front of. I am as a lecturer, as an instructor. You know, I don't use Zoom as a student, as a learner. I'm not at the other end. And then I was looking for. I want to raise my hand. I didn't know how to raise my hand. You know.
That's all right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I really enjoyed listening, and inshallah we can meet again.
Absolutely.
And we build our experiences and partnership. Inshallah.
Absolutely. Partnership.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. It was a pleasure to speak with you all again. I hope to speak with you all again soon, and one day in person. I will finish by saying that on my street, someone has put up 10 Palestinian flags all along the big road in front of my street on the flagpoles. So as people drive into Dublin City, there's 10 big Palestinian flags waving every day, which is nice. So solidarity to every one of you. And as I say, just I think of you, and you know, friendship is what I hope to offer in these times. And it's good to see you all again. And until the next time.
Thank you, Dr. Ciar, for your lecture. It is a really very interesting and very fruitful lecture. And this is the second lecture we have. And we have also 2 coming lectures, inshallah, in the future.
Yeah.
This is one thing. And we would like to thank you also and your people for your solidarity for our cause in Palestine, really. And I'd like to thank all our friends, colleagues and students who were with us today. And inshallah, we'll see you in the future. Thank you, Dr. Ciar.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Thank you, Rafat.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Yeah, be strong for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. الله يعطيكم العافية شباب. ما شاء الله عنكم.
الله يعافيك دكتورنا. شرفت دكتور حبيبنا.
This is the second meeting, right?
The second lecture. الأولى كانت what sustainability means for Palestinian universities.
طيب يعني احنا ممكن يعني واحنا هون في الجامعة هيك تعملوا لنا قعدات ونحكي احنا مع بعض كمان ونطور. يعني والله انا بكون كثير مبسوط نتعرف عليكم.
إن شاء الله رب العالمين. إن شاء الله بنتشرف فيك دكتور حبيبنا.
الله يرضى عليكم. يعطيكم العافية.
ألف عافية. شكرا لكم.